Hey guys, Justin Conroy here, and today I want to talk to you about why you should have an emergency fund and how they can not only help you have more stable finances, but also reduce your stress in life. If this is your first time here and you want to learn tips, tricks, and hacks related to personal finance, how to build wealth, and how to better manage your money, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. So why do you need an emergency fund anyway? First of all, emergencies always happen. It isn't a matter of if, but when. At some point in your future, you will be faced with an unexpected situation that you weren't planning on having to pay for. And that right there is the inherent mistake that people without emergency funds are making. They're not planning for the unexpected. You know, back in my early career, I worked in a manufacturing environment, and their teachings on personal safety is something that has always stuck with me. They believed that there is no such thing as an accident. It took me a while to grasp that concept, but once I got it, it really changed the way that I think about life and planning. Take any safety incident you can think of and ask yourself, how could I have prevented this from happening? There's always an answer. I believe the same applies to your finances. You know that an emergency is going to come up. Eventually, your car is going to break down. You might get into a car accident. Your kid might fall down and break their leg. Some kind of global health crisis might emerge and shut down your entire city. Your refrigerator might stop working. There's a plethora of things that can happen, and in all likelihood, they will happen to you at some point in the next 50 years. So why not prepare now? Why not prepare yourself by having enough money in the bank to cover any of those issues 2 to 10 times over, depending on the event, so that you can have peace of mind and not have to worry about them when they do happen. Knowing full well that emergencies will happen eventually, why are some of you walking around without an emergency fund built up? It seems that whenever I encounter folks who don't have an emergency fund, they always give me the same excuse.
I just can't seem to save anything up, Justin.
Yet somehow, magically, when they do have an emergency, they always seem to be able to pull through, or they find a way to make it work. So why don't you take that same energy and motivation that you magically have when the emergency does come up and find a way to save up an emergency fund so that you can stop worrying about money. Okay, next reason why you need an emergency fund. It ensures that you don't go into debt, or at least further into debt. I've talked to way too many people who have credit cards just in case of an emergency. This is a surefire way to dig yourself into a hole. It amazes me that these people are usually the same ones who are too poor to save up an emergency fund, but somehow they're simultaneously rich enough to pay thousands of dollars in interest every single month. I mean, I wish I had that kind of disposable income. Anyway, so how does this work? How does an emergency fund keep you from going into debt or further into debt? Well, it acts like a shock absorber for your bank account. Let's look at this from the debt standpoint. Let's assume you have no savings, no emergency fund, and you have a very high amount of debt, and you're using that debt as your emergency buffer. So over time, you pay off your debt and pay off your debt and pay off your debt, and then one day the emergency happens. Whatever it is, it happens. So you go into higher debt. Now you're back where you started. So you pay it off a little more, a little more, a little more, and you have another little emergency come up. So you go into more debt. And then you pay it off, and so on and so forth. And you never really get out of this cycle because you don't have a way to protect yourself from going further into debt. So what does this look like when you have an emergency fund? Well, let's imagine that you still have a lot of debt, but you also have a pretty big emergency fund saved up. As time progresses, your emergency fund stays the same and debt gets paid off very slowly. Then one day, the emergency happens. So instead of going more into debt, you pull out of your emergency fund instead. Now at this point, your debt payoff becomes a little bit slower until you replenish that emergency fund. But once it's replenished, you get back to paying off your debt. Then time goes on and another emergency happens, maybe a bigger one this time. No big deal. You use your emergency fund because that's what it's for. You halt your debt payoff, you pay your emergency fund back first, and then you repeat the cycle. And in this way, you never go further into debt, and you eventually pay it off. And then you just have this emergency fund there to protect you for the rest of your life. So if you're in debt, an emergency fund can help you get out of debt faster. And if you don't have debt, an emergency fund is your bank account's shock absorber. It keeps you from bottoming out ever again, and that means you never go into debt, and you never have to pay extra in fees or interest. Listen, to everybody out there who doesn't have an emergency fund, those of you who keep getting beaten down all the time by the unexpected things that keep popping up and knocking you down, I'll tell you a secret. Some would say this is the best kept secret of people who are good with money. People who always make sure to have 3 to 6 months or more in an emergency fund. We don't have emergencies. They seem to magically disappear when you have an emergency fund. Let me put it like this. The average American household, depending on which source you use, makes about $50,000 per year. Take out income taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, and you're left with something around $40,000 per year. Assuming that the majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, that means that 6 months worth of expenses would be something around $20,000. So here's the deal. When you have $20,000 in the bank for emergencies, emergencies no longer happen. What you have are inconveniences. Let's say your spouse takes out the trash one night and ends up slipping on the curb and sprains their ankle. Happened to my wife once. After urgent care, x-rays, crutches, and a boot, you're out about $300. And you know what? When you have $0 in the bank, $300 is a lot of money. That's a serious emergency. But when you have $20,000 in the bank, $300 is nothing. $300 is a drop in the bucket. Let's say you come home tomorrow and your refrigerator has stopped working. When you have $0 in the bank, oh no, what am I gonna do? But with $20,000 in the bank, guess I'll have to spend my Saturday shopping instead of having fun. And of course, the ultimate emergency. What happens if you go into work tomorrow and get told you don't have a job anymore? When you don't have an emergency fund, this can be devastating. But when you do have an emergency fund, yeah, it sucks, you lost your job, but you've got several months to figure stuff out before you have any real problems. Back in 1996, the notorious B.I.G. released his hit Mo Money, Mo Problems. It was super popular when I was growing up, and while it was a great song, it's completely wrong. In my experience, when you have a good emergency fund built up, you really don't have problems. Only nuisances and inconveniences. With that, if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future videos, don't hesitate to leave me a comment down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell before you leave. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, thank you for your time and support. Have a good one.